Welcome to the Introduction to Redux Toolkit. My name is Quinton. For those of you who don't know me, I'm dev up in Seattle. I've been with Carbon 5 about 2.5 years now and have been working primarily on mobile projects, some native iOS and more recently some React Native. And recently I got an introduction to Redux Toolkit and was so compelled by it that I want to share it with you. So Redux. So the duck is a waterfowl of the family Anatidae. They share this with swans and geese. The etymology of it is from the Old English duke, diver, and it was a relatively obscure bird until the Mighty Ducks really put it on the map. Har har, just kidding. Redux is a JavaScript state management library. It was created in 2015 by Dan Abramoff in preparation for a talk that he was giving. And he had this insight that he noticed that like the flux pattern was very similar to that of a reduce function. So flux has, a store that is receiving a bunch of actions that the user is taking and potentially mutating that state. That's essentially a reduce function over time. You have your accumulator, some initial value, right? And then that accumulator might change according to what happens when evaluating the contents of whatever you're enumerating upon. So that was his insight, and thus was born Redux, and it kind of became the de facto state management tool for React. But its simplicity in its design intended for it to be portable between projects. So you can use it anywhere. Angular uses it, React, clearly React Native. It's so popular that when they introduced hooks, the React team also introduced or used Reducer, which is essentially Redux, just in a more simplified manner. So that's Redux. What's Redux Toolkit? Redux Toolkit is the opinionated and standardized approach to writing Redux. You can think of it as akin to, say, Expo for React Native or Next for React, although those are a little heavier weight and have like greater implications than Redux Toolkit. Redux Toolkit is intended to just streamline declaration. Like you still end up with action creators at the end of the day. You still have the reducer. It's just a more expressive way of declaring the reducers and actions and whatnot that eventually boil down to the root reducer. It's written in, it was released in 2019. We're at 1.5.1 now. And it's really, I think moving forward, it's going to be pretty difficult to avoid for new Redux projects. In going through the documentation, the Redux documentation is littered with references to Redux Toolkit. They kind of like typically provide a side-by-side of like, here's how to perform some operation in classic Redux. And now here's how to perform it in Redux Toolkit. And typically it's a lot more expressive, shorter code footprint. It's pretty nice. So it's probably going to be difficult to avoid for new Redux projects, and it's easy to incorporate into old Redux projects. So given that it was released in 2015, Redux has like, that's, as old as the elves in technology terms. So there's a lot of inaccurate implementations of Redux that can really benefit from consolidation by using Redux Toolkit's tools. Okay, so Redux 101. Redux is really just this reduce function that we talked about earlier, right? You have your state here. Let's see, yeah. The reducer is evaluating the action that comes in and potentially mutating state. And this is a pure function in that like it's not going to alter its state. It's going to return a new state according to what's described in the action. So you can see here, we are declaring our reducer. We're passing it into the store with create store and some initial state. If you're interested in being notified when the state changes, you subscribe to that and then can reflect upon the store's state with get state. And then finally, on this bottom line here, you can see that the stored dispatch function is being called with this plain JavaScript object. That's your action object, right? With a type that names the type of the action and some payload that's associated with that action. This dispatch function is then wrapped in, or this dispatch call is wrapped in an action creator, which is named favorite card in this example. So these are the basic building blocks of Redux. So moving beyond basic Redux, when you are in any sort of real world situation, you are going to end up with a lot of different actions, a lot of different action creators, and potentially one massive reducer, right? Where you switch over every single action name that could possibly happen. And inside of that, maybe you want to switch over the payload of those actions. So it's common to break out logic to separate reducers. And this ends up creating a pattern where for any reducer, you're going to have at least 3 files, right? A constants file where the action names, which are just these strings, are created. Those are consumed by an actions file where you're declaring your action creators. And then they're also, the constant file is also consumed by the reducer file where you declare your reducer, switch over the action names, and et cetera, et cetera. So for any concern, if I were building a card game, maybe I want to keep track of like card state. I need a card reducer, and that implies a constants file and an actions file, and et cetera, et cetera. That's a lot of files. So the Duct structure proposes a single file per gander. And what that means is they're saying there's not much benefit to having your actions and constants and reducer files like separate from one another. It really makes sense to co-locate all of those different pieces of code concerning the same slice and just co-locate that in one file. You can read the essay proposing this structure. It has a bit more opinion about how the file should be structured. But this consolidation at the end of the day is a worthwhile improvement. It's easier to read, it's easier to maintain. But it's still a bit boilerplatey in that we're having to declare action names that are then turned, like all of these constants are declared. We can do better. So enter Redux Toolkit slices. So a slice is the Ducks pattern with written code. And what that does is you have this create slice function that does a lot of implicit action declaration for you, given what you pass to reducers. And we'll see an example a little later. So this reducers argument that's passed to create slice is an array of reducers that really target one action in particular. So instead of some massive switch inside your reducer function where you're switching off the action name, you can instead write the body of each case as a separate function. And what Redux Toolkit slices do is reflect upon the names of those functions and give you action types and action creators for free. The X-reducers argument also allows you to respond to foreign action names, and this comes into play when you're dealing with async thunks, which we'll talk about in a little bit. TypeScript also pulls action matching into the type system, and the Redux Toolkit matchers are pretty expressive and can really help to clean up complex case declaration. There might be situations where in your reducer, you want the same effect to happen for multiple actions. And this is any or is all of action matchers help to express that in a really clean way where you would otherwise have to be writing some like massive Boolean statement doing string equality. Okay, so let's get into some examples here.
Are you taking questions?
Yes.
Are there other alternatives to the what was it? Is any? Is all of? Are there other way?
I'm not
like in
aware of
TypeScript,
those.
there's a lot of like giant lists of possible classes rather than like maybe leaning on interfaces as like is implementation of blah, blah, blah.
So we will have I think I have an example. Oh, no, I don't. I think those are the two main matchers, but what you can do is you can write an interface like such, or you can write a matching function to kind of encapsulate those cases and then match upon those. Does that answer your question?
I think so.
We'll take more at the end. So here is an example of classic Redux without Redux Toolkit. And you can kind of see here that we have like 3 files created, right? Some like constants file declaring the action names, and actions file declaring your action creator. That would be this favorite card function. And then finally a reducer. So you can see here they're importing the constants again. We have a declaration of initial state and then some sort of reducer where we do something interesting and return a new state object. 3 files, oh my God, it's really difficult to deal with. Now let's get them in a row. Okay, so here we've done away with 3 files. Everything is co-located in 1 file. It's a little cleaner, and we're still exporting the reducer and the action creator at the end of the day. So building upon that, now we have the Redux Toolkit slice of implementation of this same suite of code. So you can see here with create slice, we provided a name, and this is used to populate the action names. So if you had, if everybody has a reducer function named favorited card, I think these the actions that are generated from each slice are able to be namespaced as not to step on each other's toes. Right. So we're not declaring actions at all here. Previously, we had to declare the action names and then an action creator. That's all gone and provided implicitly by the card slice. So you can see here we're destructuring the actions object and the reducer from the card slice, and then exporting the actions thusly. Okay, moving on. Okay, right. So slices are a really big deal, but Redux Toolkit provides a lot more tooling, including the Immer library. This simplifies reducers like significantly. Previously in classic Redux, right, you can see that like Redux cannot change manipulated state directly. You have to, a reducer should not manipulate state. A reducer should instead return a new state object. So you can see here, we're having to do a lot of, say if we have this favorite card action, we have to construct a new array by spreading the previous favorites array and whatnot. This, as state grows, this can be like difficult to express. But with Immer, you can just manipulate state directly. And this kind of Immer there's a lot of magic that's happening under the hood, but it's essentially like this like dirty object tracker where you can, where it detects changes to state and then constructs new state implicitly. So it looks like mutable state is back on the menu. Let's see. Create async thunk is a pretty huge addition to Redux Toolkit. This pulls in the Thunk API, which is instead of an action as some like plain old JavaScript object being passed to Redux, you can have a function being passed to Redux. And the Thunk, the Redux Thunk middleware keeps track of, reflects upon all the actions that are coming through Redux. And anytime you have a thunk, it evaluates this thunk and handles any side effects before hitting the root reducer. So that's all well and good, but what is really rad about this is that thunks may be async. And Redux can like keep track of that. So you'll kick off a thunk, That will be evaluated by Redux Thunk middleware. The promise will be resolved, either resolved or rejected. And then Redux can do interesting things based on that return value. And it's really rich in that you can cancel pending thunks when necessary. It is possible for thunks to be no ops in that they do nothing. So you could inject behavior into your Redux by just passing the thunk that does nothing. But where it really shines is calling new action, dispatching new actions depending on the return value of your async operation. So here's an example of create async thunk. You can see here, it's a little different from the promise of clean action creation because the promises are more involved. We have to throw the return, excuse me, we have to throw the functions for handling the different resolution values of your async and sorry, of your promise into extra reducers. So you can see here, it's a little less clean, but is capturing any way that your state can mutate. So in conclusion, Redux Toolkit is the fire emoji. It's a really worthwhile and lightweight layer over Redux. It's not really like replacing anything. It's just an enhancement. It's really easy to refactor. So if you are in some legacy Redux implementation where you've got actions all over the place and massive like files, this really helps to slim down some of the boilerplate cruft. In my opinion, the implicit action names and creators are the biggest wins, and async thunks help to allow you to like implement your own API layer. But soon you won't need to because Redux Toolkit query is coming, and that's gonna be pretty huge. Okay, so with that said, thanks, and happy to take any other questions.
Any questions for folks?
I don't have a question as so much as a request. Based on like how quickly, sorry, I hear myself in the background. It's very weird. Based on how quickly a lot of the React stuff happens and changes and upgrades and gets refined. And we seem to have a good number of React experts at Carbon 5. I'd love to see like a page in our Notion where we're sort of like maintaining and guiding people for like what is the latest and greatest that they should be using in React and what they should be discarding and ignoring.
Yeah, like what to do when you're on a React project.
Yeah, like almost we should have
that.
like a React committee, which tracks these things and helps like keep us on target, because that world seems to move a lot faster than and have a lot more opinions and solutions than some of the other worlds that we work in.
I would love that.
That's a good idea.
Awesome. John, do you have a question? Oh, sorry, Quinton.
Oh yeah, go ahead, Quinton.
No, I was going to call your name.
All right, I'll take it. I'm going to make just a quick pitch for sagas instead of thunks. It has the same problem, which is you have to do a little bit of extra that doesn't quite fit into the slice, because now you're creating actions that are going to get used in a file that's sitting way over there. And so now you've got a little bit of a weird import. And if you do the old style, then you have a list of events that's just your constants file, and everybody who needs them can import it. I don't think it's that bad, but we are using this on our current project, and we've got sagas and we hooked it up and using the slice, and it is kind of a nice way to put it all together instead of having the directory that has actions reducers and select whatever, all the things. And then I wanted to get behind what Brian just said, Brian Kelly. I'm looking at this pattern and then looking what you had in your example, and they're a little different. And I've talked a bunch with Ryan about conventions in JavaScript and how in Rails, there's all kinds of rules. Like those projects look pretty much the same if you kind of just do Railsy stuff. But in React, every team can decide where they're going to put a slice and how they're going to unpack it and what gets exported and what doesn't. And it would be really, I think it would help all of us if we had some documentation like that. Because the other problem that I'm finding now is the clients also who have done React are coming from some other project with a different shape. And so when they go, oh, we're using slices. Oh, well, where did you put them? Oh, and how did you export them? Like why? So yeah, that's not really about your talk. That's a bigger thing, but I like that your slides would be the beginning of that Notion page, or they could be if we thought they were like a pattern that we could all sign up for. Or you could just say, this is our pattern because I know what I'm doing, even though you're a quack. Anyway, nice.
Yeah, definitely. Mr. Briggs.
Yeah, just whether you go sagas or thunks, another thing that's really cool that I have no idea when they introduce this to the library. But if the action that you're dispatching returns a promise, the dispatch call will leak the promise back to you. So where you're calling that dispatch, you can await it, which is a really powerful feature that I didn't even know existed for a long time. And so I'm totally with a lot of folks that like the space moves too fast, even though I feel like it's certainly slowing down. It's not slowing down fast, I don't think. And so there's like lots of little, like, I think this is why like front end really likes it, because everybody has their own way of doing it. And so libraries that are successful because they don't try to prescribe too much to you. And so it can be widely adopted. But yeah, that causes like a huge amount of pain where everybody's like, oh yeah, Redux, I know Redux, you know Redux too, right? And then you get on a project that it's totally different from what you expected, which is pretty junky. But yeah, thunks are, sagas are super supported, just not like a main part of RTK. And if you look up the docs, like they'll be like, oh, sagas are a thing. They're over here. You should go look at that if you're interested in that. So totally a valid solution.
Eric.
Just one small point. I'll point out, if you're on the fence about like learning TypeScript, this is probably like the best reason to do that, because it's like well documented and well supported, and it's a concrete reason to use TypeScript.
Actually, I have a question for Quinton. Like as someone who is like jumping into because I know that we were coming from a code base that was like very, very old Redux, and we were trying to like, you know, bring orders to the world. Like, did you personally feel like Toolkit was like, I guess necessary for that? Did you like that Immer was included in there? Like, I know Immer sometimes like very like controversial. Like some people are like, oh, this is really like great, and other people are like, oh wait, I'm suddenly not writing normal JavaScript inside these things. Like, how did you feel about it?
I think what I liked the most is that was the consolidation of like all the actions and whatnot. Like the mere notion of slices like really helped me like manage like what was like manage the state of the like of my mental model of the store. I didn't really use like Immer. I wasn't like particularly offended by it. I think it's easy enough to, you know, just return some mutated state value, but sorry, like a new state. But I mean, if you can do it in one line, okay, like might as well take advantage of it, you know?
Did you find that the Immer portion of it? Oh, sorry. Did you find that the Immer portion of it adds some type of additional tools? Because that's one of the things, like they advertise that a lot, in the fact that it's like quote unquote mutable state. But other than that, it's like, is there any additional like sugar or something that you get with Immer? I'll look it up.
Yeah, I don't know.
Thanks, Quinton. That was great. And for all the
Awesome.
questions,
Yeah.
those were great.
You
Yeah,
are
thanks
welcome.
everybody. I think we're done for the day. We'll see you all tomorrow for more awesome talks.